Hey guys, this is Dave with Audioin, and this is the Trn Bax Pro. This is TRN's flagship Iem, which is great. However, they took a pretty big risk with its pricing because, well, we all know this particular price range is extremely competitive. And the reality is that the price to performance threshold seems like it's just getting lower and lower every year, which means companies are really being pushed to step up their game. So I guess the question is, can TRN's latest flagship hold its own among the competition, and does it offer performance that is worthy of flagship pricing? Well, those are the questions I'm going to attempt to answer. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Let's go over what's included in the box first. Of course, we have the Iems and cable. The cable is modular, which is nice, and they've included 3 different interchangeable termination options, a 3.5 single-ended, 4.4, and then a 2.5 balanced as well. It also comes with a simple hard case, a pretty nice assortment of tips, and then a tool for changing the switches. So again, this is TRN's flagship, and while it's not in the kilobuck range like a lot of other flagships, it is still TRN's most expensive offering as far as I know. So the Bax Pro is priced at $410. And when you read the specs and the driver configuration, it doesn't seem that unreasonable really, because it is a 5-driver tri-brid with 2 balanced armature drivers, a single dynamic driver, and then 2 EST drivers. And they've used pretty decent drivers as well. Also, at first glance, the build quality and the cable are quite good as well. But then after a closer look and then spending a little more time with it, I did notice some things that I do wish they had maybe designed differently. And it mainly has to do with the fit. Now, most Iems work perfectly fine with my ears, but I did have a little bit of a problem getting the correct nozzle angle and also getting a good stable seal with these, and that was even using some of my own ear tips. I did eventually get a pretty good fit using the Divinus Velvet tips, and then also Dunu's SNS tips worked pretty good as well. But then I was having issues with the QDC 2-pin connectors, causing the cable to go over the top of my ear instead of behind my ear because of the way it angles the cable back instead of straight up. So in the end, I just ended up swapping the cable out, which I guess for me isn't really a huge deal, but if you don't have an extra cable, that could become an issue. And at this price, I do feel like most consumers are probably going to expect issues like that to be worked out. There are also 3 switches in the back of each shell that allow you to switch between different sound signatures, and we will talk more about that in the sound segment of the review, of course. As for the design, I do like it. The cutouts in the faceplate are pretty cool, and the all black shell with the black cable is pretty clean looking. It just has an overall very nice, sleek aesthetic to it. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Okay, let's talk about the sound of the Bax Pro. So with 3 switches and each switch having 2 positions, you technically have 8 different possible switch combinations. At first I thought it was 9, but the equation isn't 3 times 3, it's actually 2 times 2 times 2, because each switch only has 2 positions. And then if you look at TRN's website, they actually only recommend 6 positions. But none of that really matters, because there were really only 2 combinations that even came close to being something that I might be able to listen to. So those are going to be the 2 that I'm going to focus my review on. So basically all of the other combinations simply just didn't work for me, because they either had too much bass or too much upper mid-range or treble energy. And to be perfectly honest, even the 2 that I'm going to discuss have issues. And I was also having some confusion about which switch did what, because the individual switches didn't seem to be corresponding to or affecting the frequencies the way I was expecting them to. Long story short, I just had to mess with them until I found something that was workable for me. And the 2 combinations I settled on were switch 1 up and switch 2 and 3 down, and then the other combination was with all of the switches in the down position. Of all of the combinations, those seem to be the ones that made the most sense to my ears, and they were different enough from each other to actually give me a little diversity in tuning. Now, I should say that none of the combinations really fell within my tuning preferences, not even these 2. All of them are basically different variations of V-shaped tunings, and I do have some V-shaped tuned IEMs that I love, but this can't really compete with those. Now, of those 2 tuning combinations, the one that worked the best for me was switch 1 up and switch 2 and 3 down, because it seemed to be the most balanced and natural sounding out of all of them. And it just had the fewest problems in my opinion. The other combination, again, which is all 3 switches down, added a little more bass, and it also decreased the upper mid-range energy and was the more fun signature of the 2. But I want to focus on the first combination again, which is switch 1 up and switch 2 and 3 down. Then we'll come back to the combination with all switches down. Again, this is a V-shaped signature, so there is an emphasis on bass, upper mids, and treble, and then the mids are recessed. But if we break it down, starting with the bass, we do have sub-bass roll-off. So the overall bass presentation is a little more mid-bass focused, and the sub-bass isn't going to have as much energy as the rest of the bass frequencies. Dynamics are pretty good though, so it does deliver pretty decent slam and impact, although there is better out there at this price. And the biggest issue I have with the bass is in the transition out of the bass into the lower mids, because there's definitely some bass bleed and things can get a little muddy coming into the mid-range. Now, I have a lot of songs that I use for testing bass, but one that I'm kind of remembering, one that stood out to me, was the track Glimmerings by Go-Go Penguin. It's good for testing lots of things, but at the time I was specifically listening for bass texture and also bass bleed into the low mids and mids to see how well controlled everything is. And I was also doing comparisons with the Performer 8, Studio 4, and Bravery AE, and I think several other sets. But if you listen to the way Nick Blocka, the bassist, is playing, he's jumping back and forth between high bass notes and then also low bass notes. But I noticed that when the higher bass notes were struck, they had a tendency to kind of overshadow some of the low mids, and the bass quality was just generally a little billowy sounding. And it seemed to be affecting the low mid-range detail, and I felt like there was some detail loss in the mid-range overall. And then as you move further up into the mids, you do have a pretty big dip that happens right around 800 hertz, and I think that was causing some instruments and vocals to sound just a little bit unnatural. And then suddenly there's a sharp rise into the upper mids, and then that peaks out a little earlier than what you typically see at the peanut gain region. So you don't really have a very smooth transition into the upper mids either. And I think that's also contributing again to some of that unnaturalness with instruments that I heard. Although I do feel like that extra energy in the upper mids does help just a little in offsetting some of the bass and mid bass energy. And that amount of energy is actually pretty substantial. And it was even starting to become just a little fatiguing at times. And then if you move a little further up into the treble, that energy doesn't really let up much, at least not in the lower treble. So what that means is you're gonna have a lot of energy in cymbal strikes and stick attack on snares. And it also helps to reveal a little bit of needed treble detail, since again, you're missing the detail in the lower half. But then we run into another very large dip around 7K, and that is having a little bit of an effect on the highs. It seems like some cymbals sounded kind of cut off, and that could also be contributing to some of the unnaturalness that I was picking up on. But then that treble energy does kick right back up in the upper treble, which is needed because it does help, again, to restore a little more detail and micro detail. And it also brings just a little more shimmer and air up top as well. So the treble extension is actually pretty good. So that's the first combination. So now let's talk about the second combination. And this is with all the switches in the down position. And I'm not going to do a full sound breakdown because almost all of the issues that I addressed with the first combination are present with this combination. So there's the bass roll off, but it does have good dynamics. Then we've also got the same issues in the transition out of the bass and the mids with it having some bass bleed. We've got the large dip around 800 hertz and then that sharp rise and a peak in the upper mids that's contributing to some unnaturalness, and then also that big dip around 7K. Now I will say that the peak around the peanut gain area does start a little later, around 2.5K instead of 2K. And that does help a little in smoothing out that transition into the upper mids. But again, in the treble, you do have that dip around 7K, and then past that, there is a pretty good amount of treble energy, which brings some needed detail. And also, again, we've got good extension into the upper treble as well. But the biggest differences between the two combinations are in its general tuning. The first combination, which we've already discussed, which is switch 1 up and switch 2 and 3 down, is going to have less bass and more forward upper mids than the second combination, which is all switches down. Now, I want to go back to what I said about the switches not corresponding to the frequencies, because this is a pretty good example of what I was referring to. This position increases bass energy, although the bass switch is actually in the down position. Again, this is the combination with all the switches in the down position, and it also reduces the upper mid-range energy, which actually gives the bass even more energy. And remember, when you reduce the frequencies in one part of the tuning, it's basically the same or the equivalent of boosting them in another part of the tuning. So this combination is going to give you a little more of a fun presentation than the other combination as far as the bass energy. And it also sounds a little bit smoother, again, going into the upper mids. But again, this is a bass dominant presentation, which means all of the issues that were present in the bass and the lower mids as far as the muddiness are now also a little more pronounced or in the forefront with this combination. Now, as far as its technical performance, I do think it does pretty good as far as its upper mid-range and treble detail. Although I think it is being a little overshadowed by what's happening in the bottom half as far as the lack of control in the lower mids and mid bass. The soundstage is about average in terms of its width, and the imaging is also pretty good as well. Although I do feel at this price, it could be a little more focused. So in summary, I still feel the best combination was with switch 1 up and switches 2 and 3 down. It just had the least amount of issues going on. That being said, at $400, the BAX Pro is going up against some pretty incredible sets like the Performer 8, Studio 4, and even some less expensive sets like the Blessing 3 or even the Bravery AE. What I can say about it is that it is a fun set. Dynamics are pretty decent and its technical performance is okay, but again, in the end, there are better sets out there at this price. So that concludes my review of the Trn Bax Pro. Thanks so much for taking the time to watch. If you like my content, please take a second and hit that subscribe button. Also, if you would please like this video, please share this video. I hope you guys have an awesome day.